Well, here we are back on Bayou Sports Talk here on Ole 640 KTIB, and with us on the phone now a gentleman who, proudly to say, a member of the original Saints team in '67, but has done a heck of a lot more in his life than just football, and that, of course, Jimmy Heidel. How the heck are you doing today?
Oh, we're doing great in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Everything's going well. We got about 1,500 new jobs, and everything's going well.
Boy, I tell you what, I think you're giving a prelude to running for governor on that speech.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Oh, well. Well, maybe you can run down here one day. We'd love it.
Witzel wanted me to, but I just couldn't move to Louisiana.
Well, I tell you,
because I got a grandbaby down there.
well, I tell you what, just as long as he's not your campaign manager, you'll be okay.
That's right.
No telling what promises he'll make for you, that is. But according to the old book here, I had to dig this out before I came in, that you were you born and raised in beautiful Yazoo City?
Yazoo City, Mississippi. A lot of famous people were from there a long time ago.
I believe, wasn't one of them Jerry Clower?
Jerry Clower and, let's see, Haley Baba, and there's a whole bunch of folks came from Yazoo City.
Wow, I tell you what, great name for a place, and one heck of a town. Now, I take it life growing up in the beautiful state of Mississippi must have been pretty good for you.
Yeah, we had a family of 3 boys, and all of us played football. And of course, I started kind of late playing football because early on in my life, I witnessed a young man on the football field. I think I was about 4 years old that was injured and died, and I was never going to play football. So older brothers always make you do something, so he called me, chicken and everything else. And then finally one day my father said in the 10th grade, if you'll go out for 1 week, I'll promise you that your brother will not bother you anymore. So I went out and I loved it, and all of a sudden I was a football player.
And then from that point on, I guess you obviously had done pretty well in high school because you moved on to a school with a pretty darn good football program in Ole Miss. Was Ole Miss one of your favorite schools growing up?
Well, I really never thought about college and football or anything like that, playing, and then was recruited by, believe it or not, LSU and Georgia and several other universities, Mississippi State and Ole Miss, and I chose Ole Miss. And ended up, my older brother and I went to Ole Miss as a team.
Mm-hmm.
We went up there, and he was a defensive end, and I was a defensive back quarterback in high school, and ended up playing defensive back 2 years at Ole Miss.
Well, of course, all those years at Ole Miss, and I guess many years before and after you were there, they had a pretty darn good legendary head coach in the name of Johnny Vaught, so it must have been one heck of an honor to play for him.
Johnny Vaught, and then all the coaching staff was great, and I don't know if you know this, William, but I ended up marrying Buster Poole's daughter. He was a coach there with Johnny Vaught for 30 years.
Wow.
That's how I tell everybody that's how I got to play football at Ole Miss, is I married the coach's daughter. But, Buster and his family are from Mint County, some over in Louisiana, and there were like 24 Poole and Poole relatives that went through Ole Miss, and 18 of them were All-Americans.
Wow.
And we've got All-SEC player right now called Robbie Robertson that's a linebacker for Ole Miss is playing, which is Buster's, I guess, his sister's boy, sister's grandchild.
Wow.
So the legend is still there, and all the Pools, there were 3 Poole brothers, Buster and Ray and Barney Poole.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, all of them played pro ball. And Uncle Barney actually played 8 years of college football, 4 at Army and 4 at Ole Miss. So.
Right, and many listeners who may not understand why that was, that during the war, especially World War II and shortly after, they gave all college football players who played at one of the military academies 4-year exemptions. So therefore, he had 4 years at Army, 4 years at Ole Miss, and collectively, as you just said, 8 years of college ball.
That's right, that's right.
And I tell you what, the Poole name in Mississippi, for those Louisianians that didn't follow Ole Miss football that well, were just tremendous, like you said, in the college and the pros. And to get off talking about your career for a minute, I'll never forget the Barney Poole story, and he corrected me on this one night when he did a show in New Orleans, that I think it was in 1953, which would have been the first year of the new Baltimore Colts. There was a game where I believe he hurt his finger in a game, and they took him to the hospital to reset it. And after they reset his finger, the ambulance had gone back to the stadium, and he was walking out of the hospital. And I think didn't he like hitchhike back to the stadium to play in the fourth quarter?
Something like that. I guarantee you that was a fool. I guarantee you.
And but it was a great story. And of course, I believe you said Mr. Raypool was with the Giants for a while, right?
Giants, and he played Canadian football in Giants, and of course Buster, my father-in-law, and this is kind of puts everything in perspective now for what players are being paid, because he was an All-Pro with the Giants for about 4 or 5 years, and after he passed away and I was cleaning out everything, I found a telegram from Wells Mara his last year, and he was an All-Pro, and he said, "Dear Buster, we hope you'll come back for at least one more season. We're going to raise your pay to $125 a game."
Wow. I think it puts it all in perspective with today.
Yeah.
So a lot of guys who had that opportunity for a long time played for the love of the game, and you know the money per game. Well, I guess was enough, kind of like a bonus if you had a regular job on the side.
Oh yes, a lot of them did that, and of course, you know, that was wasn't bad money back then. I guess in the 30s, early 40s. So
Yeah.
you know, be able to have that much money and send money home to Mama Boo.
Exactly. And going back to your career, and we'll talk about more of some of the things said in a minute, but it also says here you had a lot of postseason games you were in: the Sugar Bowl, the Bluebonnet Bowl, Liberty Bowl, and even the College All-Star Game of '66.
Yeah, that was an interesting story in '66, and I'll have to tell you that story because in the College All-Star Game, we you know, from all over, Jim Grabowski and Donnie Anderson and a lot of players from all over the United States got together, and we worked out for 3 or 4 weeks to play against the Green Bay Packers, you know, the NFL champs. So we thought we were going to win, and, you know, we got really encouraged and went out on the field. In halftime, they had us 48-0, and we still were encouraged at halftime that we were going to come back and score and everything. And I tell you what, I hold a record that will never be broken, because first of all, they don't play that game anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But second of all, it's a very unusual record. He became my roommate later on, Jim Taylor, but he came through a hole in the second half, and I'm the defensive back, and I'm supposed to tackle him, and I hit him about 13 yards out from the end zone, wrapped around his body, and he carried me and the ball into the end zone for a touchdown. That's the longest carry of a human being in the football in the history of that game, and I'll always hold that record.
And I don't think it's going to be broken because the All-Star Game went out in '76.
That's right.
So now you're giving me something to look for if I ever find it on film. So that's going to be my new search now. I'm not going to worry about Saints games anymore.
No, you need to worry about those because we got to win.
Exactly. And I take it when I mentioned earlier, of course, the Sugar, Bluebonnet, and Liberty Bowls. Did y'all have success in that at Ole Miss?
We did. We had success in the Liberty Bowl in '65. We played Auburn, one of our biggest, and I was a quarterback that year, and we beat them 13-6 in that ball game.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, I think in the Bluebonnet Bowl, we lost to Tulsa, and the Sugar Bowl, that was, I've forgotten what the score was. Isn't that funny?
Oh, well.
Okay. It was great to be in New Orleans and get my first taste of everything going on in New Orleans. So.
Now, wait, before we go further, you told me a story that we have to mention, because you just mentioned the game against Auburn, that a while back you were looking for the footage of that game, and didn't you have to go through Auburn to get it?
I had to go through, yes, I had to go through Auburn and pay for it and get it, because when Steve Sloan came in as coach at Ole Miss, he threw out all the old film of the University of Mississippi and said, "This is a new day. We don't need to see any of the old stuff." And so there's nothing available at Ole Miss anymore.
Wow.
So, you know, really hurt. You know, they could have made a lot of money off that by selling old films to people that were very interested, that went to school and so forth. So,
Wow.
it's just one of those things that happen.
Yeah. Well, to to bigger and brighter things. We eventually you would go on to the pros. Now, if I read the media guide right, were you actually picked in what was called the Futures Draft?
I was picked in the Futures Draft, number 3 by the New York Jets, and I was picked in St. Louis Cardinals, number 9.
And then when your college career ended, you chose to play with St. Louis.
St. Louis, yes. Only because my father-in-law said the AFL would never amount to anything, and that what St. Louis offered me was more money than I would ever be worth anyway, so I might as well take it.
Dare I ask, how much was the initial contract?
Well, it was a 2-year no-cut contract, $50,000 bonus, honeymoon, car, and so it was a wonderful offer in '66. I can tell you that.
Well, I tell you what, I'd take that today, me. Yeah, I think anybody would love 50 grand anytime. But go to St. Louis, and according to my old book here, 8-5-1 in 1966. Head coach was Charlie Winter.
Charlie Winter, and he was a great coach. That was an unusual year because what happened was there were 50 rookies in the camp, and some All-Americans from Oklahoma and other places, and you just never know what happens. And out of that whole training camp, the worst thing that happened to you was on the Friday night to have that knock on your door, and 4 of you are in the little rooms, and somebody you knew was going to have to turn in their playbook and say goodbye. But out of those 50 rookies, 5 of us made the ball club. Jim Hart, which, ended up being the quarterback, and a guy named Johnny Rowland, Roy Shivers from Utah State, and a big old defensive tackle named Dave Long, 6'8", 290 pounds, from Iowa, and me. And so, it's quite interesting to go through that with a lot of your players. They feel like, well, send my family on to St. Louis. I got a 1-year no-cut contract, no big deal. And I'm still, in my room. I hadn't unpacked my bag. I'm still waiting for it to close and go home, but it didn't happen, and we made the ball club and moved my wife to St. Louis, and we had a great year. Being a rookie behind, believe it or not, Larry Wilson and Jerry Stovall were my mentors up there, and Jerry's a big LSU guy, and Larry Wilson's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in your entire life. And great year. Pat Fisher and a guy named Jim Burnett played quarterback, and so I'm the guy that's backing them up. So I have to tell you one story though. We're sitting on the bench, and it's kind of cold, and we're up north, and we're playing a ball game, and I had this stocking cap that I put on my head to keep my ears warm because I only went down on the kickoff.
Right.
And we didn't score that much, so I didn't get a chance to get warm all the time, so I've had my head covered, and Chuck Drulis, the defensive coach, came out and looked at me and saw that on my head, and he yanked it off and said, "Let me tell you something, if I ever see that on your head again, you're gone."
Wow.
And so that's kind of the way it was back then. I mean, you endured everything. You didn't wear the stocking caps or, anything on your head. I mean, you were a football player, and you were expected to be that way.
Well, I tell you what, it was definitely an era I consider overall tougher players. The rules, I don't think were near as strict when it came to, shall we say, near late hits, and guys took a beating. And I think back then, through the mid-'60s, if not the late '60s, there were cases where you could hit a ball carrier after you had 1 foot out of bounds and had no penalty.
That's right. That's right.
And
and they even encouraged you, if someone had an injured arm or an injured knee, to go for it.
Wow.
So, that's the way it was.
Well, I'll tell you what, one piece of film I have, I don't know if this happened when you were there, but I remember watching Larry Wilson on film. I mean, there was a streak, I think, of 4 games one time where he played with 2 broken hands.
2 broken hands.
And he actually had a couple interceptions.
He really did. I mean, he was one of the most, you're talking about the most wonderful guy in the world that wasn't worried about his position and wasn't worried about what you were going to do or, taking his place or anything else. He coached you. He helped you. He's just absolutely a wonderful
remember he said one game he played and he got his front teeth knocked out, and the dentist told him, look, don't worry. In fact, in a week you'll probably be eating steak. And he said, hell, after a week I couldn't even eat soup.
That's exactly right.
And also we should note Larry Wilson, who just announced his retirement. He was either player, coach, or administrator for the Cardinals organization for 43 years.
43 years, and he deserved every minute of it to be and enjoy what he really enjoyed.
Oh, yes, and you mentioned Jerry Stovall, who had years at LSU, did well, but Pat Fisher was a great story. Wasn't he only like 5'9"?
5'9", 135 pounds.
And yet it was just tougher than can be, and had a great career with St. Louis and Washington.
Yeah, he's one of the little guys that loved not only could he cover a receiver, but he could also knock your head off. So absolutely a wonderful player.
And now there's a guy with St. Louis at that time. Unfortunately, and I don't mean to badmouth NFL films, but a guy who's, unfortunately, most people only remember him for dropping a pass in the Super Bowl with Dallas, but became a Hall of Famer because of his years in St. Louis, Jackie Smith.
Jackie Smith, let me tell you, I had the opportunity when I was, left there and went with, I was taken in the expansion draft to New Orleans. Went down, worked out at LSU. Jackie Smith and I worked out together with Jim Taylor. Jackie Smith's one of the nicest guys that's ever been. Very humble, very appreciative of any support he gets, and he's just a wonderful person.
Yes, indeed. And now, you mentioned Jim Hart, who later became, an 18-year player for St. Louis. Oh, and his backup, who played in the league a long time, too, Charlie Johnson.
Yeah.
Interesting names on that team. I see here also a guy who came with you to the Saints was on that squad, Ray Ogden.
Yeah, Ray was there from Alabama.
Wow. Now, there is a trivia question I tell people all the time. They don't believe me, and I want you to verify it for all the listeners that the NFL Films did a trivia special one day. And they asked the question, what NFL receiver holds the record for most touchdown receptions in the 1960s? And this guy caught 120 touchdown passes, and when a lot of people think of that era, and guys like the guy with the Redskins, whose name I forget, Charlie Taylor, big names like that, a lot of people don't realize the answer to that question, Sonny Randall.
Oh, yeah, Sonny Randall was absolutely a clutch player. He could always catch the ball. And yes, I would think that record was just right there. And I would think it's very true, because if anybody had the hands to bring in a ball within, 5 yards of him, he was going to do it.
Oh, yes, and people have to understand as well, the one great thing about the 60s, and you have it a little bit today, was that it was one thing to be a speedy guy, but let's face it, you could run a 4.3 40-yard dash. If you couldn't catch the ball, you couldn't do it.
Well, let me tell you something. The slowest guy that I've ever seen play wide receiver is Danny Abramowitz.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, actually in training camp in San Diego, they released him and he wouldn't leave the field, and all of a sudden we got the wide receivers hurt and they brought him back. And so you think about Danny, you think he was a speedster, but he had hands that he could catch anything, anywhere, anybody threw him. So Abramowitz was, ended up being all-pro and everything else with the Saints.
Is it interesting you segue into that? Now, you come to New Orleans, it was through the expansion draft, correct?
Uh-huh.
And you come to New Orleans, and, here's a brand-new team, and John Meekum, of course, at the time, 27 years old, owns an NFL franchise. What were your first impressions when you met John Meekum?
Very sharp guy, very admirable, just a really nice, happy person. I really think he wanted to play because he did work out with us a couple of times in training camp. So, he was at the University of Texas, I understand, and hurt his knee as a running back and never got to really play. But just a great guy and just really gung-ho about a New Orleans Saints team going on the field.
Yeah, and of course, he was named the owner back on December 15th of '66. I think back then he had to pay a whopping $8 million.
Yeah.
And of course, today it would be well over $500 million.
Oh, yeah.
Now, he purchases the team, and then about a month or so later, in comes a gentleman who would later go into the NFL Hall of Fame, Tom Thiers, as head coach. What were your impressions of him?
It was a funny training camp. you talk about a new organization, I mean, of course, the whole idea when we first came down there was that we were not going to work out in training camp in Louisiana. We ended up in San Diego at Point Loma, right out of San Diego at California Western University, and that was our training camp. And, beautiful field, man, overlooking the ocean. The breeze was there all the time, and we went through a lot of players, a lot of hard work. I remember Earl Leggett one night in the dorm after being there he came out with the rookies and worked with them, and then we all came out, and he was so worn out. He was laying in his bed, and one night he just screamed and hollered, and everybody thought he was having a heart attack, and ran down the hall and looked in there, and he said, "I just want to tell you, I finally made it through a day." He was just, at his age and a number of years he played, it was kind of funny that, he just was happy, but I mean, everybody could breathe, and the cool weather off there, and then we came back in July, and right across Lake Pontchartrain, it's a small, Catholic school, I believe.
St. Paul's of Covington.
Yeah, and we worked out over there, and all of us almost died because it was so hot.
Oh, yeah.
We thought we were in great shape. But, it's just great memories of that with Gary Quazzo and a lot of players that were in that training camp, and how we got together and how we all started thinking alike, working together. And, we won several of the exhibition games, thought we were going to Super Bowl the first year, and ended up winning 2 games all season. But, that's the way it happened.
Well, I'll tell you, one guy who I think was almost a perfect fit to help lead that ball team, a gentleman who came from San Francisco, was involved in a car wreck when he was there, and one time running back converted to quarterback, Billy Kilmer.
Billy Kilmer. I mean, no one ever thought when Billy first came to training camp, I mean, if you looked at his physique, I mean, you wouldn't think that Billy could do much at all, and, you look at his legs, and they're all beat up, he's had a lot of problems with his legs. And here comes in a guy, and he becomes a leader. What a wonderful quality in that guy. I mean, I just have thought about him and seen him a couple of times over the years. Just a wonderful leader, and he did the best he could do and did a wonderful job with the Saints.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about Billy Kilmer involving television. When the Saints arrived in New Orleans, and everybody had initially projected Gary Quazzo would be the starter. Channel 8 in New Orleans, well, back then they were actually Channel 12 in New Orleans, WVUE, they signed Gary Quazzo to a 1-year contract to a television show called Quarterbacking the Saints. And what was so funny was, here he has this show on Saturday nights, and Billy Kilmer was the starter for opening day.
Yeah.
Well, here's the funny story. Going into that first Gary Quarterbacking the Saints show, the gentleman who hosted it is still on in New Orleans, Buddy Diliberto. And after the Friday practice, before that show, Billy Kilmer in the locker room goes up to Buddy Diliberto, taps him on the shoulder and says, "I'm sorry, buddy, I got to run. I don't want to miss the Gary Quazzo show." But everybody in the locker room got a huge laugh that listened.
Oh, I know.
And then you mentioned Danny Abramowitz. Now, here's a guy you mentioned was cut, didn't want to leave, got brought back, became a special teams ace, and halfway through 67 got his chance to start, and which wound up was the beginning of a streak he had of 105 games played with the catch. So you talk about a guy, 17th round pick from Steubenville, Ohio, which by the way is the home of Dean Martin, and just, I mean, let's face it, he really was another perfect mold for that team, a guy who never would say quit.
Which goes to prove, it doesn't matter how big a star you are in high school, it doesn't matter how big a star you are in college. It's what you do from level to level that counts, and, he excelled, and the record speaks for itself, all pro.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw him a couple of years ago when I was down in New Orleans, and he was coaching with the Saints and everything, and just a great guy.
Oh, yeah.
Loves life, loves to be around everybody, and
course, you were part of a defensive backfield back then that first year, and yourself, and I know I'm going to forget some names, but, George Rose and Obert Logan, Bo Burris, George Youngblood, but without a doubt, the guy who led that team, 10 interceptions, comeback player of the year, Dave Witzel.
No question. You look at him, and he became a good friend, and we visited a lot of times over the years, but, before he passed away. But, Dave was a leader on the field. He was, he did the oddest things as a defensive back I've ever seen. It was almost like somebody telegraphed to him where the pass was going, because the wide receiver would come down, cut inside, Dave would stay, outside, and all of a sudden, the ball's coming outside, and Dave has it, and he's gone for an interception in the other direction. I mean, he had been there so many years. I guess he just figured out what the plays were, and we studied a lot of film together, and he would always say, now watch this, Jimmy, this is such down, and this is traditionally what this guy has done, and I would say, man, what a wise man. He knows exactly what they're going to do. And sure enough, there he was the first year making. But, he really didn't like to tackle anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Have you watched some of the films where he kind of backed into them a little bit?
Yeah, just slightly. Oh, man. Now,
Great football player.
Oh, yeah. Now, before I go any further, because there are other names I want to mention, but besides Coach Fears, there was a gentleman who really made a name for himself in the NFL as a coach with the Saints that year. Well, a few guys on defense, but the first name I remember is Jack Faulkner.
Jack Faulkner was a very stern individual that was very dedicated to what he was doing, always kind of jolly and joke with you a little bit, but very serious about what you were doing. I thought he was a great coach.
And also another gentleman who I believe his brother Bob is the chancellor at Ole Miss, and we're talking about Ed Kayet.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. You were talking about, Robert is a good friend of ours at Ole Miss, the chancellor, and looks like we're going to have a good ball club next year. So with Eli and several others coming back, so we're just going to have to look at the SEC and see what's going on.
Well, I tell you what, a lot of folks down here, thanks to Archie Manning, Ole Miss product, who really had a lot of frustration over the years with the Saints and has produced some good sons. And, of course, Cooper went to Ole Miss before he had to step down because of, I believe, a neck problem.
Yeah.
And, of course, Cooper went on to Tennessee, and Peyton went on to Tennessee, has done really well, and, of course, with the Colts. And Eli, you think we might hear Eli's name possibly for that Heisman Trophy?
Well, it might be, but I don't think he's looking at that anyway at all. I think right now he's concentrating on this season and being one of the best that Ole Miss has ever had. So
very good. And well, going back to that first year at the Saints, there's one player I'm always going to remember who, to me, seemed bigger than life because he had about 14 years of playing before he came in, and now, of course, Pro Football Hall of Fame, the defensive end Doug Atkins.
Doug, I'm going to tell you what, Doug was one of my mentors. When we came down there, he would, of course, being 6'8", 280 pounds, and we go out on the field, and he'd put his arm around my head and pick me up off the ground with one arm and say, you're not as big as a shadow. He always called me Shadow. And I remember a game with San Francisco where they had a rookie defensive end in there, and he wasn't doing too well. And so Doug, when it came in, and we were on the huddle, and he told this guy, said, now go over there and watch. I'm going to show you how to do it. And he went up there and lined up. Of course, he went through and just knocked John Brody down the first time and lined up again. He did it again. The third time he hit Brody, looked down and he said, it's getting a little bit tough back here, the kid. And Brody said, yes, it is. He said, it's going to get a hell of a lot tougher before I leave. And he ran over there and grabbed that defensive end and said, now, son, that's the way you do it. Get your butt back out on the field.
Wow. That's incredible.
That's a true story.
Wow, that is incredible.
I was the defensive back, and I watched it from there. And, Doug was some other kind of guy.
One guy, part of that 67 team, he later went to the Pro Bowl after 68. And now, like I said, there's some good defensive linemen y'all had at the time, Mike Tilleman, Earl Leggett, and Jim Garcia, and Brian Schweda. But one guy who a lot of young people now know as a broadcaster, and that's Dave Rowe.
Oh, Dave. Dave was absolutely, and I love to hear him on television, and you can tell him that when you see him. But I loved it. He was one of the nicest people, but, you know, when it came to playing football, Dave Rowe played football.
Right, and
he got down and scratched for every minute of it, you know.
Oh, true. And now, you know, to finish up on defense, you know, of course, the linebacker position, Fred Whittingham and Ted Davis. Now, a guy who became a fan favorite because of the famous fight up against the New York Giants. Steve Stonebreaker, who went after center Greg Larson with the Giants, claiming that Larson had threw a cheap shot at Tom Hall. Stoney not only was one hell of a tough guy, but like I said earlier, he really seemed to draw fans together.
You know, Stonebreaker really did. He liked to talk a lot, and he liked to produce. And, you know, when we got into a couple of those fights, you know, I wasn't used to those type things, and I can remember just as well, I mean, you know, in a fight and just in the middle of it, and he looked at me, and I had my helmet off, and he said, "Son, you're going to die if you don't put that helmet on." So I popped that thing back on real quick to make sure I didn't get my head just drummed in. But he, you know, Stonebreaker was a unique individual, and he really loved life and everything. So, I mean, I'll remember him always because he did like to talk and ruffle the other players.
And, of course, later on, he would become a Saints color analyst for radio in 2 years, 74, 75. Worked with, ironically, a gentleman from LSU, John Ferguson.
That's right.
And just a tremendous career he had and went on to do a lot of restaurant work before he left us in 95.
But I tell you what, he had a forearm like a big old block that would knock the dickens out of you.
Very true. Now, there's one guy I wanted to hold his name for last because you have a story where he almost ended your career.
That's right.
And Jackie Burkett, who had come to the Saints from the Colts. Tell everybody what I'm referring to.
Well, you know, we were playing in a game in right down there in Old Tulane Stadium, and the guy tight end, I believe it was the Colts, came down and hooked in front of me, and I was trying to hit his back of his head with my fist, and about that time Jackie hit my elbow, and it went out the other direction and bent my arm all the way back. And so I'm laying on the field, and they bring an ambulance out and all, and I look up, this story I hadn't told you, I look up, and my pregnant wife, they're lifting over the fence, and she comes running out on the field, and I'm laying there trying to push my elbow back into place, and I said, "What in the world are you doing here?" And Joanna said, "Well, they're going to take you off in an ambulance, and I don't know where you're going." So I said, "Just get in the ambulance." So we have 80,000 people watching my wife running across the field. Well, I pushed my arm back into place, and we go, and we put a cast on it from my wrist all the way to my shoulder. And he says, "You know, you're going to be out for a while." So the next day, I had a pretty good game and was named Defensive Back of the Week, and was on television, and they were talking about it, and I said, "Oh, you know, I'm going to be able to play," and, you know, and everybody says, "Well, you know, I don't know about the cast on your arm." So I get home that evening, and Tom Fears calls, and Tom says, "Well, if you want to stay with this team, you'll have to cut that cast off and get ready to play the rest of the season." So I called Jim Taylor, and he brought a saw over and sawed it off. We taped it up, and I played the last 5 games of the season with a taped up elbow, and did pretty good. So.
All righty. Now, that first season, Saints go 3-11, which at the time was an NFL record of number of wins by a first-year expansion team.
Yeah.
And, of course, the rules at the time, you know, they didn't have no free agency like they do now. So trying to build a team from scratch is difficult for any expansion team.
Yes.
And, of course, the Saints did really well with that. They started the season 0-8 before winning 3 of the last 6. And one memory we have to talk about, because this by far is in the top 5 in Saints history. Here y'all go out there. Opening day was the regular season, September 17th, 1967. and the Rams kick off, and here's this rookie from South Carolina State named John Gilliam. Runs back that opening kickoff 94 yards for a touchdown. That stadium must have been loud.
That stadium was the loudest roar I've ever heard in my life, and you could have, it looked like a uplifting of everybody in the stadium just kind of going up in the air. And I want to tell you what, when he took that ball and took off, it was absolutely unbelievable. And that's what gave us the whole idea that, you know, we're going to have a winning season. We're going to be the best expansion team that's ever been in the history of the NFL. So, you know, just look at us, Rams. We're going to beat your brains out. And I think maybe, you know, that was the excitement that is still standing with the Saints to this day, other than the long field goal that we had.
From Tom Dempsey.
Yeah, from Tom Dempsey.
Yeah, and I think forever, as long as we have NFL films, as long as we have Saints history, those two moments are going to stand out, hands down. And, you know, that season, I think back at it, because obviously I wasn't born in 67. I didn't come around until 69. And I go back and look at the film with that, and talking to so many guys, especially winning 3 of the last 6. The first win was in Tulane Stadium against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Right.
And Walter Flea Roberts runs back the opening kickoff for a touchdown. And he winds up scoring 3 touchdowns that day. And when I talk to him, I always call him the first unofficial Saints MVP.
Well, he was, I guarantee.
31-24 over Philadelphia. And finally, that must have been a relief to finally get that first win.
Oh, it was. It was.
And then the other 2 wins that year, I think, the last home game against the Atlanta Falcons, Billy Kilmer and the Saints drive about 96 yards, eventually hits Kent Kramer for a touchdown pass to win. And then the last game of the year was at the Redskins. I think it might have been 35 degrees that day. And hit Don McCall had a long run, Danny Bramowitz had a touchdown. Just, you know, beat the Redskins sound.
Everybody's starting to come through.
Oh, yeah. And now my understanding, if you remember this, because different people told me the story, then after that final game at Washington, you all flew back, and didn't Al Hurd have a big party for y'all?
I think that was on a weekend, I think about a week later.
Okay.
Big party for us, and we all went up to his place. No, that was Pete Fountain, I'm sorry. I don't remember.
All these musicians.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they love, you know, one of the most wonderful things in the world was how the people treated us in New Orleans. I mean, everybody told me when I was up for the draft originally, man, if you can get to New York, they'll treat you like kings and queens. And let me just tell you something. We were treated so well in New Orleans, and I know the Saints are still being treated so well. But I said, you know, I told somebody not too long ago, if you think New York can do something for you, you have to go to New Orleans because, you know, they were just so wonderful, William, to us the whole time we were there. I mean, you know, my wife was pregnant, having our first child. The doctor said, the only thing I want for payment is a autographed football of the Saints. You know, when we got ready to come home, everywhere I went, I took friends. You couldn't pay for a meal. I mean, it's just everybody treated us like we, you know, belonged there and that we were their best friends. And so New Orleans has a tradition of making sure that all the people that are there are always treated right.
Wow. And it's something that, you know, goes to show a lot of people when there was a lot of, well, I know there's still a lot of love in the world today, but the time this city was so excited to get an NFL team, and they knew everybody on that field was trying, and there wasn't any quitting anybody, as Jim Garcia told me often. And 3 wins that year in '67, and after you left, they had 4 wins in '68, 5 wins in '69. Turned out to be a great honeymoon period for the city of New Orleans and that football team. And like you just said, the appreciation abound must have been just overwhelming.
Oh, it was. I mean, just everywhere you went, you know, if they said, you know, don't I recognize you, you know, and that type thing, and I said, yeah, you know, I'm with the New Orleans. Oh man, you know, what do you want? You know, everything. They were just wonderful to us.
And then, of course, now after '67, wasn't it they were trying to trade you off to the Jets?
Well, no, I actually was released from the Saints, and I wanted to go to Denver because I had a friend there that was a recruiter and a scout and everything, and ended up they said I was drafted number 3 by the Jets, so I had to go with them, and I went to New York. And believe it or not, Joe Namath, that whole year was unbelievable. We went through training camp, played all the exhibition games, and my wife had our first child, and I decided I needed to come home and not move them to New York because I was already there and they would have to move.
Right.
And so I came home. We were playing a ball game in Memphis, and I told Wheatview Bank, I went up and sat down with him and said, I'll get off here, coach, and go home. And he said, oh, no, we want you to stay. And I said, no, I'll go home. So that's the year they won the Super Bowl, so I lost my Super Bowl ring. Because I would have played in the game. I was going to go to the farm club, but if you remember, all the defensive backs got hurt, and everybody moved up from the farm club to play in the Super Bowl. So.
Wow. Well, I guess sometimes, you know, things in life happen for a reason, and I guess obviously the family should have took priority, and it did, thankfully for you. And now tell everybody, since your football career, that you're pretty big in the commerce work up there in Mississippi.
Economic development and recruiting industry in the state of Mississippi. Served with the governor of Fort Ice for 8 years, heading the Department of Economic Development, and had about 280,000 new jobs created. So we're working on that now. I'm back in Vicksburg, Mississippi, where I was, and we got some Nissan suppliers here and some more coming, so we're very excited about that, and I love working with the people, and, the whole goal is to get somebody a job and help their family and help them make a living and a good quality of life, and that's what I've been doing for 30-some-odd years since then.
Wow, and it goes to show, folks, all the young people may be listening, is that, playing NFL football may be a great dream and all, but, having a good college education, especially to help you on your way once that career is over, can really pay you a lot more dividends than playing ball ever could.
That's exactly right. You make a little money on the front end, but in the long run, you need a life of working, and I finished my master's degree at Ole Miss in economics and city planning, and that's where I've been ever since.
Well, here we are this morning in Saints Hall of Fame Golf Tournament in Kenner with a very honest, young-looking Heisman Trophy winner, Danny Werfel. How are you today?
Super, thanks.
Well, I'll tell you, how's everything up with the Redskins right now?
Well, we had a kind of a tough year. I think there was a lot of expectations going into the season with Coach Spurrier, and I think we learned a lot of things. Right now, I'm actually a free agent. I'm not signed back yet, but that's what I've been told will happen eventually. So I'm looking forward to going back and get the thing turned around.
Now, I believe after your stay here in New Orleans, was it Chicago you went to first?
I actually went to Green Bay first, then to Chicago, then to New Orleans.
Okay, now wasn't there a very brief time you were technically a member of the Houston team, the new Houston?
I was a Houston Texan for a week. Yes, correct. After I was in Chicago, I was drafted by them in the expansion draft before I was traded to Washington.
Now, anytime a first-year coach comes into the league, there's always going to be bumps in the road along the way. And the one thing I noticed was there seemed to be a lot of rotating with the quarterbacks. To your understanding, does it look like now that Patrick Ramsey is going to be the full starter?
Well, I think he'll get a great chance. They brought Rob Johnson in, and certainly he'll, I'm sure, get a look. Coach is going to play the guy who he feels the most comfortable with, and anytime you just show up, you give everybody a chance and see what they can do.
Well, before we let you go, am I right? Is New Orleans your permanent home right now?
That's correct. My wife and I live in New Orleans because we work in the Desire Housing Project at the Desire